know, the issue of the environment and environmental justice is extremely important. I mean, we can't have freedom and be free on a planet that is uninhabitable. And with climate change and a lack of climate action coming from not only the federal government, but also from corporate spaces, I wanted us to take a look real quick at who are some of the operators, the people that are helping companies that operate pipelines like Dakota Access Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Remember, we checked in with Crystal Cavalier down in North Carolina about that pipeline that's going through Southern Virginia into North Carolina, and citizens are very concerned there. I want us to take a look, if we could, please, at a video that was done by a bunch of indigenous youth. Earlier this year, they did a run from the Midwest to Washington, D.C., in order to express why it is so important that these pipelines be shut down in their communities. Tunde, if we could please take a look at, this is the Great Plains Action Society, and this is a snippet from their action, their youth-led action, a run from the Midwest to Washington, D.C. to shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline and to stop the Enbridge Line 3 in Minnesota. Tunde, can we take a look at that, please?
Indigenous youth from all over the Great Plains, such as the Standing Rock Sioux and Cheyenne River Sioux nations, were welcomed by the Meskwaki Nation in Iowa. Some of the Meskwaki have joined in their run to Washington, D.C., where they will urge President Biden to shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline and stop Line 3. Climate change is inevitable if we allow the fossil fuel industry to continue to extract and exploit stolen land. President Biden has promised in his Tribal Nation plan, quote, to build a more resilient, sustainable economy, one that will put the United States on an irreversible path to achieve net zero gas emission economy-wide by no later than 2050. He will partner with tribal nations to get there, end quote. Join the Standing Rock Youth Council, Respect Our Water, Cheyenne River Grassroots Collective, and many others on April 1st by telling President Biden to uphold his promise to tribal nations. And as always, Mini Wachoni, water is life, shut it down.
I love to see youth taking charge, taking the lead, taking actions like that, making things happen, making sure that this issue of these pipelines, it should not be forgotten. It cannot be forgotten necessarily in indigenous communities. But for those maybe who might live in East Coast metropolitan areas, we can get very easily disconnected from some of these struggles. So I just wanted to make sure that we saw what these indigenous youth are talking about. And you guys, if you think that the Dakota Access Pipeline people are done, they aren't. In fact, late April, it was reported by Bloomberg Law that the Dakota Access Pipeline lawyers, they're headed to the Supreme Court. This is how far they intend to take this case, to dispute a ruling that required more environmental review for the pipeline project. And they're concerned that additional environmental reviews and more scrutiny will result in the pipeline being shut down, which is exactly what we want. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that. According to the Bloomberg piece, like I said, this was late April. The lawyers asked a federal appeals court to freeze a mandate that would lock in the January ruling that the Energy Transfer Partners pipeline was approved without proper study under the National Environmental Policy Act. So the way that a lot of these fossil fuels companies are allowed to continue to basically desecrate the earth and put people's air and water in jeopardy is because there are very powerful law firms making this happen. These companies have very deep pockets, and these law firms are very ruthless. And late in April, actually around the same time that this Dakota Access ruling, not necessarily ruling, but the intent was known that they intend to go to the Supreme Court to continue to fight this. A group of young lawyers, law students rather, produced a letter. 76 law student organizations presented a letter to one of the law firms that represents the Dakota Access Pipeline to let them know that their conduct is shameful. And today we are joined with the campaign coordinator for the Law Students for Climate Accountability organizations. Aaron Regunberg is joining us today. Aaron is and he's a student at Harvard Law. And like I said, he's the campaign coordinator, and Aaron is joining us today, making some time for us. Aaron, we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad to be here, Kim.
Aaron, so when I saw that your group had done this, I said, hey, that sounds kind of cool. And I wanted to find out more about it. So can you tell us more about what the Law Students for for Climate Accountability is, what this organization is about, and why was it so unusual for over 76 law student organizations to band together and present this letter to the law firm?
Absolutely. Well, you had it exactly right just now when you explained the way that the legal industry serves to prop up the fossil fuel industry. We've seen in the climate movement, the strategy of sort of tackling the different pieces of infrastructure that these corporate polluters use to continue, condemning us to an unlivable future. So that, the divest movement has had so much success targeting the financial infrastructure that keeps these corporations afloat. The Sunrise movement has been targeting the political infrastructure, particularly in the Democratic Party, that protects the fossil fuel industry. And so for us, for the folks who came together in Law Students for Climate Accountability, which now is a network of law students spanning over 50 law schools around the country, we recognize the way that the industry that we are joining as aspiring lawyers also is playing a pivotal role, as you described, in allowing fossil fuel companies to continue polluting, to evade accountability for the damage that they're doing to frontline communities. And so we wanted to do what we could to use our position as law students and the certain amount of leverage that we have as students that these firms are, very put a lot of resources and energy into trying to recruit, to draw a line in the sand and say that this is unacceptable, that the legal industry needs to change. And so, this work started January of last year when students at a number of different law schools, first Harvard, then Yale, then NYU, then Michigan, Stanford, engaged in direct action to shut down the firm recruitment events that firms like Paul Weiss, which represents ExxonMobil, were holding at their schools, where these firms, they come onto campus, they rent out like a fancy restaurant, they try to wine and dine students. And of course, they present this image of themselves as a great ethical place to work. They talk about, the tiny fraction of pro bono work that they might do. But we know that the reality is very different. And so to really flesh out that reality, this year, Law Students for Climate Accountability produced a report that looked at the fossil fuel, the legal industry as a whole, focusing on the Vault 100 firms. That's this list of 100 of sort of the most prestigious law firms. And what we found out is that these firms are overwhelmingly working to prop up the fossil fuel industry. They are, in the last 4 years, they worked on 10 times as many cases exacerbating climate change, defending fossil fuel companies, as they did cases combating it. They lobbied 5 times more often for fossil fuel companies than for renewable energy companies. They did hundreds and hundreds of millions more dollars in transactional work for the fossil fuel industry than for industries that are in line with a livable future for our planet and for all of us. And so we're working to put a spotlight on that, to make sure that law students around the country understand this work, understand in particular that there are some firms that are really going out of their way to do the worst possible things. And so most recently, as you mentioned, we have launched this campaign targeting the firm Gibson Dunn, which represents corporations like Chevron. They represent Dakota Access. They have really been pioneering new, horrifying, unethical tactics to to allow these companies to do what they do. And so we're working to push them, to let them know that our generation of lawyers, the folks coming up in this industry, are not going to stand for that. And we're going to fight. We're going to fight to make sure that it becomes not okay to be doing this work. The culture is a big part in the legal industry, and right now there's a social license, right? There's a norm that says that a firm can do this kind of work and it's considered fine, and you can be prestigious and you can consider yourself, a lawyer in good standing, not a scumbag for doing this kind of work. We want to remove the social license in ways that have happened in the past. A really good example is the fight against big tobacco, through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, where for a long, long time, folks were trying to bring cases to sue big tobacco for the damage and deaths it was causing. And big tobacco, just, incredible resources legally, was just able to slap everything down. Over time, it became less and less cool, fashionable, okay for the top firms to be representing these companies as public opinion started recognizing how horrific they were. And that really coincided with a real turnaround in those legal efforts and theories, and eventually, had some huge, phenomenally strong suits that really brought the industry to its knees in a lot of ways. We haven't gotten there yet when it comes to Chevron, ExxonMobil, the fossil fuel industry, but we need to get there. And as law students, we want to make sure that we're a part of that fight.
Aaron, when I think about law firms that could represent a Chevron or Dakota Access Pipeline or any sort of other fossil fuel companies, I'm immediately put into the mindset of the movie The Devil's Advocate, right? I'm thinking about Al Pacino as the devil running this evil law firm that represents fossil fuel companies, exactly like we have here. So let me ask you this. When it comes to some of these like David and Goliath sort of dynamics, right? And it seems as though, even though Earth is Earth, Earth is the David in this situation. Why does the Earth need more lawyers? And I know that there are great groups like Earth Justice and a bunch of other ones that absolutely advocate on behalf of climate and people like vulnerable communities that have been impacted by environmental injustice. But tell me why it's important for young lawyers or young aspiring lawyers like yourself to not go work for Al Pacino's devil law firm and maybe take on the legal work of climate advocacy and advocating for the planet.
Well, I think it comes down to what our vision of what the law is and should be. I decided to go to law school because I believed in at least the potential, the capacity for the law to be a tool for good, for bringing about more justice and fairness and peace in the world. And then you go to law school and you kind of come crashing up against the reality that, our legal system in so many ways does not function like that, functions to protect the power and privilege and wealth of folks at the top, of corporations that have so much power to design the legal system and the court system, and then have so much power, not just structurally, but also in the actual advocacy. So you mentioned how the folks with the Dakota Access Pipeline are now appealing their case up to the Supreme Court. Of course they are. These are institutions that have the wealth, the resources, and the endless legal capacity to make sure that every possible thing that they can do to rig the game for the fossil fuel industry, they are doing in ways that, frontline communities can't possibly hope to replicate. One of the cases we've been working to draw attention to, because it's so horrific, when it comes to Gibson Dunn, is their work on behalf of Chevron in a suit in Ecuador related to the dumping of unbelievable amounts of toxic materials that poisoned the land that indigenous Ecuadorian communities relied on to live, and the horror stories, the cancer, etc. They won this a really great settlement in that case, and the people like Gibson Dunn, instead of saying, okay, let's let the legal system work as it's supposed to, and pay those damages, said, no, we're gonna figure out we're gonna pioneer a new legal strategy where we're gonna go on the offense, and we are going to target the folks who brought this suit. We're going to target the lawyer. His name's Stephen Donziger, who basically they created a case around. He's now been under house arrest for more than 600 days because they basically set him up. It's a pretty common tactic that a lot of these firms use. It's got a name. These are called SLAP suits, strategic litigation against public participation. And basically the idea is, if I've got infinite resources, then let's use those to intimidate, bully, silence critics. Similar to, I think we saw this a lot with how Trump uses his lawyers and his legal strategies, that we're the folks that we've hurt, that have a case against us, we're gonna throw every possible made up ridiculous thing against them, but that they still have to answer for, they still have to go through the legal mechanics for, and it will just drown them in legal costs, until critics say, okay, we give up, we're just not going to do it, it's too costly.
Hey, Aaron, I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, because I know you have a heart out at 25. And before you go, I wanted to ask you this quick question. Tunde, if you could pop up, I think it's A3. It's the Law Students for Climate Accountability.org, their website. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Aaron. I want to make sure we let you go on time. That's all. But I wanted to just ask you really quickly about the scorecard here, the climate scorecard for the Vault 100 law firms. And you have only 2 law firms that have, or pardon me, 4 law firms that have rated an A grade, and lots that are failing badly. I'm curious about the law firms that you have given an A, and if there's anything maybe specific about one or more of them that warrants this A grade from your organization.
So the grading was based on looking at their firm's litigation work, looking at their transactional work, and looking at their lobbying work, and basically seeing if they were doing more of that different kind of work that was exacerbating climate change or was combating it. And so there were a couple of firms that were doing more work, whether it was pro bono work, whether it was work for renewable energy, et cetera. But by and large, we found that the legal industry really has a lot to answer for. And again, I think generally lawyers like to think of themselves as part of the solution, as standing up for justice. That's not how the industry is currently working. That's not how the culture. That's not the values that the culture is currently promoting. We have a legal culture that says it doesn't matter who you work for. You just have to represent your clients. And we're looking down, when you're looking down the barrel of an unlivable future, we have to say that's bullshit. When you're looking at these fights where frontline indigenous communities are getting destroyed so that corporations can pad their bottom lines a little bit more, you have to say that's bullshit. There's not an equivalence there. And so we're committed to continuing to organize, to continue to ramp up our campaign against Gibson Dunn in particular, but also to spread the word to make sure that our generation of lawyers is stepping up to change the industry. And one thing that gives me a lot of hope is seeing the response that we've been getting at schools all across the country. I think there's a sense, and it's often well-deserved, that, the legal education system it is very little c conservative. It values not stepping out of line. You don't want to do anything that could impact your job prospects at this firm or with this clerkship. And as we're stepping up to engage in direct action, to shut down recruitment events, to call out law firms, students are joining, and we're seeing that law students are willing to do the right thing. We care about this issue. We care about our future. We care about the folks who are on the front lines being hurt by climate change right now, and we're committed to changing this industry that we'll be joining in a few years.
Law Students for Climate Accountability, y'all. The website is ls4ca.org. Take a look at what they're doing. And I know you guys are still fairly new and growing, but when I saw that you had taken this step to address what Gibson Dunn does and how they represent these really deplorable companies that are doing irreparable damage to, like you said, frontline communities, indigenous communities, Black communities, brown communities, stuff that this does not clean up easily, right? And people need air and water, regardless of how much Chevron wants to boost its profit share. So very proud of the work that you're doing, Aaron. And I appreciate you joining us to come and talk to us about it. You guys, we've been speaking with Aaron Regunberg. Aaron is the campaign coordinator for Law Students for Climate Accountability and also a student at Harvard Law School. Aaron, thank you so much for what you're doing, and I appreciate you making some time for us today.
Thanks so much for having us. Let's burn it down.
Burn it down. I want to have you back, please. When you guys are doing something else, let us know. we would love to have you. Awesome. Thank you, Aaron.